Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 19 of Scouting Session. I'm Jérôme Bérubé, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brad Allen. Brad, how's it going?
It's going great. Just got to watch some video together and try to catch up and figure out what we're going to do and watch some players. And we're in agreement on some. I guess we'll talk about them now.
All right. So the plan for the this week episode, so we're gonna talk about five players. But before that, we're just gonna maybe recap a bit of some of the players we've watched this week. So me and Brad have watched some games together. We have watched games without each other. So we're gonna recap a bit of what we've watched quickly. So this is a bit of an intro to the podcast, and then after that, we'll just move on to the five players that we want to talk about a bit more in details for you guys. So Brad, let's start with you. Let's start with maybe the guys we watched together. So we watched Logan Hensler of out of Wisconsin. So maybe tell our viewers, like quickly a bit of your update on the Wisconsin Badger defenseman.
Sure. I have to fight. I have to fight on his behalf for our staff. That's what has to happen. So I'm the highest on him on our staff, I think. I really
Yeah.
like him. He reminds me a ton of Brock Faber, and then offensively, sprinkle in some Cam York. But I lean more Faber. So obviously, I'm pretty high on the kid. I think one of these kids in college is going to be sneaky good, like way better than what they currently
Mhm.
show, just through the first year eligibility. And for me, I think that's Hensler. So you got to see a bit more of what I love about him in one of those games. That really helped, I think. But yeah, it's one of those situations where we think highly of him still, and like we still have him very similar range to Kurban Limatov. So we definitely think there's like potential top four value there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all like him to different degrees. I think you're the highest. I was a bit down on him after maybe in the first half. Like the first set of viewings were pretty good, and then after I felt after that it was a bit of a letdown for me. But I thought he was fine at the U20. But the games we watched together this afternoon, he was really good. Very active. And maybe we can move on to the other player we watched together. Actually, we watched one of two player, but let's talk about Anton Frondell, another guy we watched together. We have talked about this player obviously before on this podcast, but he was really good again. He's our fourth ranked prospect. He's been pretty much number four in the two rankings that we have, published this season. And he's playing his best hockey of the season. Tough for him physically at the start of the year, but things are starting to fall into places for him. Is he playing the best hockey that we can project out of him? Like there's some things that we wish he was a bit better. Like we mentioned, driving the play 5-on-5 is still a bit of a question mark for us. But Brad, he's been really good in the games that you and I watched this afternoon. Maybe a your quick update on Frondell, and obviously the full long term potential this player has is pretty right up there with anyone in this draft, to be honest.
Yeah, there's basically two variations of this player and how he's interpreted. The first is that he's more of a complementary piece and that he's not going to ever really drive possession to the degree necessary to really hit the top five or even top 10 of this draft class, despite his skill set. And then there is the other side of this where people think that this season is more of just the scratching the surface of what he's ultimately going to become, which could be an incredibly dominant, driving, possession-oriented monster down the road. And we are in that camp, which is I would say uncommon at this point. I think more people think he's more like a complimentary 30-goal sniper. We think there's a lot of sequences that represent that there's very likely a star level player in the making if things go right here. So yeah, we've had him top 5 the whole season, and he had for sure at least one game, I know, Jérôme, we were watching, we're like, okay, this is exactly the style of game we needed to see, where he showed the ability to basically completely dominant on the puck. Again, not for full games, just certain sequences where it's like, okay, if this is what he is now, if he can get the right development and really believe in himself, maybe that's part of it too. We talked about that. It was like confidence really matters, like you watch Elias Pettersson, he's a shell of himself, and it's because his confidence is shattered. He has negative associations walking into the rink, and it shows. It bleeds it out on the ice. He doesn't look like the player that everybody thought he was going to emerge into, right? So it depends on the environment, what happens. But right now, we think that Frondell's starting to really cook. He's starting to simmer. Like, he's a big roast too. This is not a tiny roast. He's a big kid, and he's had some difficulty with his development due to his knee injury. So we had to be patient. And that's one thing that gets a bit tricky in any draft class, just for anybody listening, about like the process is there's certain players where you have to give them a lot of time in order to really identify and figure out what we're going to do with them. He's been one of those players. So ironically, I think, Jérôme, we've watched basically every game of the kid. I think if you combine both, he wins every game. Like, not even a question, because we want to get this one really right. So.
Yeah. I mean, we had him really high last year, and another guy we had really high last year was Ivan Ryabkin. And funny enough, like, we watched him together as well, and he was not so good. I remember, like, even last week we had a question that who could be like a big riser for your final rankings, and I said him. Based on what I saw today, watching him with you, like, I'm gonna go and delete that answer from last week's podcast, because it ain't gonna happen. He is pretty bad from what we saw today. Obviously the skating is there's not much there, and there's a lot of bad decision by him with the puck, trying too much, a lot of hope play by him. Those no-look backhand pass, like in O-zone, neutral zone, defensive zone. Like, he was trying those no-look backhand pass, everywhere. Very, like, low motor from him. Like, he's not very active on the ice. Obviously, we like the playmaking, the skill, the physicality, but I don't know where he's going to be in our rankings. He's like the ultimate wild card, but I know for sure that's a prediction. He's not going to move up. Just too many. I feel like there's too many question mark with him. To really put him in the top 10 place on our final list. Like, if I'm an NHL team, I'm kind of like scared to draft him. There's a lot of question mark with him on ice, and off ice. Like, is he really in great shape? Like, what are we dealing with? Like, what happened in Russia with Dynamo? Like, he went from being like maybe the future Michkov Demidov last year to a guy who scored 1 goal and then try everything to leave, to get away from that team and move to Muskegon. So really at this point really don't know what we're gonna do with him ranking wise, but he's one thing I know, he's not gonna move up. So Brad, maybe quickly on Ryabkin. Again, tough player to project and rank.
Well, he skates like he's at the bottom of the sea. He's with SpongeBob at the bottom of the sea, just drifting around. So I don't know what's going on. So the big thing here is, like, some players, you look at them physically, it's like what you see is what you're going to get. And then there's players like, oh, this is not a professional looking hockey player, and he has to put in a ton of work in the offseason. And that's where Ryabkin is. So from a scouting perspective, like, for instance, let's contrast him with Frondell a bit. With Frondell, the power is going to come at another level as he continues to get a real off-season physical development. We know that the mechanics are already pretty solid. Not great, but they're solid. So we kind of know mechanically how he's going to operate, what he looks like on the ice. With this kid, we have to basically like cut him in half and be like, well, that's what he actually is going to be as a pro, because he's going to have to lose a whole lot of weight here, right? So it's one of those situations where he obviously came in too heavy set. We don't know why. We have to find out why and go from there because it really does look he's skating with a grand piano. He's got Elton John's piano on his back. He's taking off. Jérôme, he's not going anywhere. So that's a real problem. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what happened. This is uncharacteristic for us, because this is the only time. Like I was talking to Jérôme about this for everyone listening earlier in the day. It's like we can't think of the last time there's been a player this dominant at 16 in the MHL that's turning into basically a second, third round pick. When is that? That's never happened. So any of you listening to this, if you can help us try to remember the last dominant MHL player at 16 that's kind of bombed out, we'd love to know, because we couldn't think of one. And this is one of the most difficult players to project in the draft, because again, he has to physically overhaul everything. And if he overhauls everything, then maybe the skating can get to a level where he can make occasionally a blind hope pass and recover on it. Because right now he can't recover on anything. He just gets drowned out immediately with the pace of play in the USHL. So, so many question marks. The draft, again, just for any of you who didn't listen to last week's episode, we think it's thickening and deepening considerably, especially in the second, third rounds. There is a bit more talent than people think now. Still not a great class by any stretch, and the depth after that really does dramatically fall off a ledge. But there's enough talent in the second, third rounds where he's getting challenged. He's getting challenged big time, and we just saw two of his worst performances, I'd argue, Jérôme, in the USHL. So we now have the whole spectrum, which is very important. We've seen his best, and we've definitely seen his worst. So yeah. We're gonna have to take right to the end of the season with this one, I think, to try to figure out where exactly we have to place him.
Yeah, and I think the combine will be really important for him. I think an NHL team will be really ready to ask him a lot of questions, because there's a lot of questions to be asked with this player. I'll just finish with some players that I watch on my own, and if Brad, you want to add something, let me know. But watch Jake O'Brien. That was one player, Brad, you mentioned that could move up on our list. Based on my viewings this week, I 100% agree. I think he was really good in the games that I saw. Obviously, the playmaking is, elite. Best playmaker in the draft. He's so good on the power play, and Brentford, they do get a lot of power play situation. So I think he leads the all OHL in power play points this season, or one or two. But anyway, I guess a bit like Frondell, would like to see a bit more 5-on-5 production out of him. But he's so smart. He makes everyone around him better. Really positive viewings for him. I watched Brady Martin out of the Sioux. He was really good. I think my comparable for him is still Sam Bennett. But, you look at the skating, look at the skill, you look at guys around him on our list. It really depends on what you believe, scouting-wise, what you value, because, there's guys that are right now or have more natural talent than him or better skater. But maybe in 4 or 5 years, it just doesn't matter, because Martin is, it's like Sam Bennett. You and I had this conversation over the weekend. It's like Sam Bennett versus Mitch Marner. Of course, you draft Mitch Marner above him. And this is an extreme situation here, but definitely draft Mitch Marner over Sam Bennett. Become playoff time, you want Sam Bennett on your team, right, over Mitch Marner. Even though Mitch Marner is the better hockey player, and it's probably not even close, but playoff hockey is so different than regular season hockey. That's a bit of the it's what you're dealing with Brady Martin. Guys around him on our list, some of them have more natural talent, more natural skater, but Martin might just be that guy that is a difference maker come playoff time. And by the way, if you're watching the Sioux, keep an eye, and that's for everyone watching this, keep an eye on Chase Reed. He's a late birthday, so he's eligible for next year, but he's been lights out in the OHL since coming over from Well, actually came over from the NAHL, not even the USHL, but he's been like he's putting some really great numbers, and I think he's going to be. He has potential at least to be like a quite of a high pick come the 2026 draft. And maybe to conclude, Jackson Smith. So we have him 11. I think from what I saw today, well, this week, that's a pretty fair ranking. I think I don't know. I think him and Merca are, you know, um, I guess we can put Hensler in that group as well. The best defenseman after Schaefer. I still have Merca over Jackson Smith. Obviously, I love the skating of Smith, but I think Merca does defend better than him, smarter. So for now, I'll still give Merca the edge over Jackson Smith, but he was really good in the games that I watched. One of them, he scored an overtime goal. That was his third overtime goal of the year. He's got 4 total goals, and the other goal was also a game-winning goal. So pretty funny to look at those stats. I watched a bit of Carter Bear out of Everett. Very different, well, not very different. Like he still plays the same tenacious style that we love about him, but offensively, not a whole lot was happening for him in the games that I saw. So, and his point per game since January 1st has dropped, by a lot. So that's obviously a guy we absolutely love in the first half of the season. Second half of the season is not going as well. So we're gonna continue to watch him because we love the way he plays, but he's gonna have to do a bit more offensively for him to keep that high ranking by us. So yeah, that's my quick update on some of the top guys that I watch in the CHL. They all play in the CHL. So maybe Brad, if you don't have anything to add, we can start with our 5 guys. We're gonna go in Russia with Roman Bausov and Daniil Prokhorov, who both play for MHK Dynamo St. Petersburg in the MHL. 2 very tall player, Brad. Bausov is 6'6". 6'5", and Prokhorov is 6'6". So Brad, I'll let you start with. You can start with I guess Bausov, or anyway, go as you want with those 2 Russian prospects.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that there's always untapped potential in Russia. You just gotta keep sweeping. Every class, it's just such a wide range of types of players, right? Which is what makes it interesting, makes it difficult at the same time, because when you got a player like Roman Bausov, what you see is not what you're going to get. This is an incredibly long-term project. Sometimes when you see a player, it's like, okay, they're a couple of years from developing into what we think they will be. Well, in this case, you're talking 6-7 years. Like this is one of those very raw players. So Jérôme came up with this comp. I'm going to steal it from him in real time right now. Igor Zamula, that is the comp. It's a very good one. Basically, Zamula was a rake on skates and was completely unpolished and didn't really look like anything, like in terms of specialization. Was he a puck rusher? No. Was he a 2A defensive force? No. Was he a shutdown defenseman? No. He's kind of just a puck mover. He just kind of looked raw and was a puck mover and looked very tall and skinny. And that's exactly what Roman Bausov looks on the ice. So why is he worth mentioning? That's a good question. The answer has to do with his puck movement and his retrieval rates and how he implements his passing. So let's look at another very raw, tall defenseman as a contrast for a second here, Zhao Wang. Right? So Zhao Wang, incredibly gifted skater. And coming into the OHL, we had already seen the puck rushing upside and some of the offensive ability that he brings. But he's incredibly raw when it comes to understanding how to move pucks in a way that manipulates the opposing first layer so it can open up his lanes. In Bausov's case, he has shown a tremendous amount of basic instincts in that regard. That is what we want. So when you're dealing with something raw, you want to see something that's already high end that really matters for the position, so they have a base to work with, and that's exactly Bausov. So that's why he's worth mentioning, is that he's intelligent enough at the MHL level already to manipulate and really move pucks in a way that can help him long term. So there is something there to mold, essentially. And the thing with fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round picks and drafts is typically you find something. So in this case, a toolkit that makes sense, 6'6" right shot defenseman, and then some sort of base that can be molded into a potential player if the kid's willing to learn. Right? And that's Roman Bausov. Now with Daniil Prokhorov, kind of the inverse, Jérôme, right? So Bausov, very raw physically. Coordination isn't caught up to him. Skating base isn't at the level it's going to be. Where with Prokhorov, this kid's a beast. Like, he's already physically quite developed. He can already drive possession down low as a result of that. He can cut. He can be a danger net front. Pretty soft hands at times. His handling rate's not bad, and occasionally he'll surprise you with his shot quality and his mechanics. So. The big thing with Prokhorov for us is that the hockey sense element is limiting. Typically, when you see players this large, you want to see that there is at least a decent sixth sense for the offensive zone. And that means being able to understand when to open up space, using his frame correctly. So it kind of magnetizes the defense, gives him more options, gives his teammates more options. Much like the player I'll never stop talking about, Dmitry Voronkov, right? But in Prokhorov's case, that's not there. So the upside's more limited, and the play style has to be more limited as a result of that. Like, for instance, like Rick Tocchet would adopt this kid. Like Rick Tocchet, this is a Rick Tocchet style of player, wants to move north-south, wants to crash the net, doesn't really know how to do anything outside of that. I don't think he can play east-west if he tried. So this is a Rick Tocchet special. Unfortunately for Rick Tocchet, these types of players almost never hold. You have to have players that can think the game at a high rate and actually make plays at unique angles and move east-west when necessary as well. So difficult to get a true read on where we're going to put him. If he can open his game up a bit before the end of the season, that would go a very long way, I think, into seeing him move up our draft board. What do you think, Jérôme, or are you with these two?
Well, I was going to talk about Prokhorov. He's interesting, but at the same time, the lack of vision, the lack of IQ by him is really alarming as far as like projecting him as an NHLer. He doesn't see the ice well. He's not a good passer, but other things that he does are quite good. I mean, he's 6'6", 210 already. I think he's second on his team for goals. His play down low is really good. He wins a lot of battles. A lot of scoring chance that he creates for himself or from winning puck battles down low and driving the net from behind, from the corner, basically. Good around the net. He's a big guy, but his skating is like actually quite decent for his size and being 17 years old. At times, he's going to surprise us with some one-on-one move off the rush that makes his case pretty interesting. But we have seen players like him from Russia before. Like Russia, they'll always have those 6'5", 6'6" winger that are interesting, and sometimes they do pan out, like Voronkov, and sometimes they don't. And I remember like a few years ago we had Kirill Dolzenkov, who was a fourth-round pick of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He might pan out at some point. I don't know if you remember, Brad, but there was also on the same team. We had Matvey Averochkin, who was also a big. He was also a big, like 6'4", 6'5". Actually, he was 6'6". Winger. He never got drafted, but there was some pretty interesting skill and potential with that player. But I feel like the big forward out of Russia that do succeed are the one with like real good hockey sense. And I think Prokhorov is missing that at the moment. But We're gonna keep watching and see if there's any progress with that. And maybe he's just scratching the surface of his talent, and maybe there's more to what we have seen so far. So anyway, interesting player. And Bozov, obviously really raw, as Brad mentioned. This is a You're drafting him at 18, and he might not play until 24, 25 years old for your team. A bit like Zemula. Like Zemula was never drafted by the Flyers, signed after the draft. Um, Played junior hockey in Canada in the WHL with Calgary. Then played 3 full years in the American Hockey League, and then last 2 years he's been a full-time player. So it's going to take some time. It's going to take a 5-6 years really for that player to possibly play at the NHL. So interesting. The two are interesting. I feel like Bosov is probably, I think, because of the hockey sense, a more probably going to be ranked higher by us and by NHL teams. I'm guessing. I mean, they're not going to be. Don't make any bets, guys. They're not going to go in the first round. They're not. This is not those kinds of prospect. But on day 2 of the draft, I think they could be an interesting pick. Probably round 3, round 4. So we'll see. Brad, let's move on to. We're just talking about two guys that are 6'5", 6'6". Let's now move our attention to two small forward. Cullen Potter from Arizona State, who's about 5'9", 5'10", and Topias Hynnenen out of Finland, who's 5'10". He's a second year eligible. Didn't get drafted last season, but we often talk about development curve. He might have one of the craziest development curve we have seen in the last few years. Score 1 goal, 8 or 9 points last year in the Liga. This year he's got 11 goals, 40 points, or anyway. He's doing really well, basically, is my point. And Cullen Potter is that guy who played for the U.S. national team last year, the U17, and then instead of playing for the U18, went to Arizona State as a 17 years old freshman. So he's one of those rare, 17 years old freshmen in college hockey. So Brad, let's start with Cullen Potter.
Sure, yeah. So Potter, Potter's been a very interesting player to watch this year. If some of you have listened to our past podcasts, we have talked about him earlier in the season, and it was kind of difficult to get a read on how his game was going to translate at that time. But the update is a very good one, which is that he's starting to understand how to take advantage of the offensive zone in ways he wasn't earlier. And what I mean by that is that he was relying a little too much on his shooting instincts off the rush behind triangles and not adapting his game to try to actually carve inward and use his skating to his advantage to be able to get closer to the net area so he doesn't have to rely on his shot quality as much. Now that he's starting to mix up his options, he's starting to understand how to fake his shots off the rush, open up that space, peel off defensemen, get to that secondary third layer of coverage, find his teammates or be able to shoot in tighter the net. And that's made a significant progress in terms of trying to evaluate the offense and its ability to translate. There is some back and forth on our staffs. Like, is he truly a top 6 forward? Is there enough dynamism there to suggest that? I really think he'll be similar long-term to Connor Garland. Not the same player. Garland's certainly more of an agitator. Potter's certainly a much better skater at the same age. But in terms of actual production, I really think there's some similarities. And then obviously with Garland, it's the agitation, which is kind of his secondary skill set, which gives him plus value. And then with Potter, I think the secondary skill that's really going to help magnify his game at the NHL level is the neutral zone possession driving ability. Very slippery. Very explosive skater. One thing that's fascinating about this player, I've talked about this before, and it still matters to me, is that he is a wide track skater. What that means is his hip line is basically always opened. It's his hip girdle. This is not, skating, again, always misunderstood publicly, but you can't change a hip girdle. Right? Your hip girdle is your hip girdle. You can't change that structure. You can open it up. You turn yourself into a pretzel, do some hot yoga, do some things to loosen it. But what you see is kind of what you get with the hip line. And because of that, we know he's going to remain wide track. Why that matters is that he's going to be very different when it comes to how he enters a neutral zone relative to somebody like Noah Ostlund. So Noah Ostlund will use his edge work and basically thin out so that it was harder to hit. Right? So that's one of those situations where a smaller forward actually has an advantage on the ice because it's harder to hit him if he's smaller and knows how to actually take advantage, basically turn himself into a human octopus and slip into a rock formation there, right? That's Ostlund. This kid can't do that. This kid's getting stuck if he attempts to do that. So what he has to do is be able to really use his handling at a higher rate to put the defense in a position where they can't angle and drive him outside still. So that's the difference. That's why we were a little more hesitant because the Potter's handling rates, they are good, but they're not Riker Lee. Okay, they're not Riker Lee good. So there's a bit of a contrast there in terms of trying to project that. Now, Topias Hynnenen, wow, yeah. So Jérôme mentioned the curve. I'm trying to think of great comebacks. Jérôme, what's one of the greatest? I mean, Buster Douglas got rocked by Tyson in the seventh round or sixth round or something really early in the fight. Maybe not. Yeah, maybe earlier in the fight he got knocked down. Basically, it was a 10 count. They let him have it, gets back up, knocks out Tyson later in the fight. It was like, oh, man, that's a good combat. That was one for the ages. Nobody forgets that one. This is the Topias Hynnenen effect here of I just can't believe it. So at U17s, this player looked interesting to me. Really interesting motor. He would get underneath players, show that he understood leverage advantages in a smaller frame, needs to have it. And I was like, you know what, this player might be something. Looking forward to watching him in his draft year. He was awful. In his draft year, I couldn't believe how bad he was. I had zero time for him. I never thought anything of him. I never thought we'd have to talk about him. And I thought anybody who had him ranked was crazy. It turns out I might be crazy because good on those people. There's definitely something here. So the big thing with Hynnenen is that he's dominant in Liga right now. It's almost like Matias Michelli. When Matias Michelli was playing full-time in Liga, he was quite dominant in driving possession and really showcasing how he was going to implement his skill set and translate that to the NHL. And Hynnenen is doing that. Heinenen's driving possession at times, and he does everything. He's very well-rounded. The skating will hold. And the big thing with this kid is to quote Lee Priest, don't measure my height, measure my width. Just because he's short doesn't mean he isn't. He's still big. And this kid is thick and semi-broad for his frame. At least that's what he looks like on the ice. So it's one of those things where I've seen him blow up grown men twice his size. So I've seen him reverse hit players out of corners to create space for himself. I've seen him be able to stick press correctly, turn a player around, turn him inside out, get the puck back off on the defensive wall. I've seen him be able to board battle successfully. Basically for a smaller forward to translate, he has to have the motor, he has to have the physicality, he has to have the leverage manipulation, he has to understand how to get out of those corners, and that's what he does. And then you look at the rest of his game, and this is where I think he actually has a bit of similarities to Cullen Potter, where the playmaking rates really hold. He knows how to take advantage of his size, his smaller frame, and manipulate hook passes and pull passes around triangles and players and set up his teammates. I would actually argue at this stage, now he's a bit older, but this stage of development, he's actually probably a better technical playmaker than Potter. He really is. He's probably more Gavin Brindley style, to be honest. So incredibly surprising player. This, for me, would be one of the biggest surprises in the draft, bar none. Very exciting overager. And I think he's one of those types of players where certainly to get Jérôme to watch him more down the stretch here, because Jérôme hasn't seen as much as I have of him. And I think Jerome's going to like him a lot.
Yeah, just to maybe finish on Potter, pretty challenging to scout freshman college player in their draft year, because it's a huge, you look at Potter. He was playing with the US U17 team last season, so their schedule is international tournament, some USHL games, some NAHL game. I believe they still play those games, so that's a big step up for him. Early on in the year, obviously I like the skating. He's fast, pacey, but there's some. I was like, God, sometimes his decision making was a bit off. One thing I noticed, like often when he was doing zone entry, he was trying those very difficult pass just when making his own entry, going cross highs, and he was often getting in trouble with those pass attempts. Um, I feel like he has fixed that a bit in the second half of the season. He's playing a bit more efficient. He does play mostly at center in the games that I've seen. Don't I don't project him as a center at the NHL level just because of his size. It might be a bit difficult for him down the middle. I kind of want to see that speed on the wing to be honest. Um, so he's an interesting guy. So we have quite different opinion on him on our staff. Um, some are really high on him. Think he could you know be a top 15, top 20 pick. I'm more reserved about him, thinking he's more of a top 25 ish pick. You know, more like first rounder for me. But to be fair, like I kind of need a bit more viewings on him and to really get a real great picture of what he's gonna be and how I would project him. Other question remains, as Brad mentioned, like is he a top six guy? Is he a top nine guy? I'm leaning more top nine guys, but I need to watch more. So we'll conclude, Brad, the episode on maybe a sleeper for us. Not really mentioned anywhere. Swedish defenseman Theodor Hallquisth from Orebro. Orebro, a program that we really like out of Sweden because that's where Leo Carlson played. We had Leo Carlson ranked number 2 in 2023, and so Hallquist, right shot defenseman. Not much has been talk about him. You and I have been watching him a lot lately. I've watched him mostly in the first half in international tournament. So, and then the second half, I start watching more G20 game by him. I think he's a really interesting player inside information. We have him ranked 33rd, so he almost made our first round in our last ranking. So he's trending up for us. He also played 12 SHL games this season with Orebro. So really interesting player to me. The thing about him is mostly like as a scout, you always project players. So it's like it's not the now, it's really what is this player going to be in 4 or 5 years. And we have seen progress with him skating wise. There's been some progress with his skating, not just this year, but from past years with information that we have. Um, and you know, the reason I like that player like at first was his physical play. He really challenged players one on one with physicality. He hits hard. He's mobile. He plays hard. He plays tough. So that was one thing I was like, okay, this guy has probably potential to be a third pairing defenseman. And then I start watching more G20 games, and then I start seeing more skills than he showed internationally. Um, there was some sequence by him that I was like, oh, okay, this there's something here. There's like his puck skills, some of the goals that I've seen him score. I was like, okay, passing plays as well that are really interesting. I think he's really underrated because he's not really been talked about all year. I think he's really interesting. He's got a lot of good quality to his game. Obviously, he's about 6'1", 6'2", but he's far from being a final product physically. Like he's about 170 pounds. That's the player that's going to play in his 20s. He's going to be around 190, 195, maybe 200 pounds. So Basically, like we use this quote often, but like what you see right now is not what you're gonna get. You have to project physical growth, and he's gonna keep improving his game, gain confidence. He's in a great program in Cerebral, and they're gonna make him a better player with time. Like maybe potentially playing full time in the SHL next season might be a possibility. So anyway, I mean, as scout, we always love finding those underrated guys in the draft that nobody talks about. So, Brad, I'll let you finish on Alquist because you and I are in pretty much the same boat here on this player.
Yeah, definitely untapped. Similar tier range to us as Henry Bertowitz. I think that's pretty fair. Like they're kind of unpolished, but there's something there, and it's all about if they can bring it out in the future and down the road. But the biggest contrast between them, and Drum just mentioned it, the hitting rates. This kid has that backup nastiness to him. It's kind of when Vegeta went Majin, tried to take over, tried to get all evil. That's what this kid's like. He can really hit. He can be nasty, and he plays with an edge. And developmentally, really impressive with the skating base. The mechanics are coming almost completely different looking, Jerome, relative to when we first saw him. That's been a huge takeaway because we think there's another level there with the skating. It's already pretty decent. And then really like he's kind of well-rounded, master of nothing. But I'll say this, that the stretch playmaking is what really caught my eye. There's a couple passes where I legit just didn't think he could make them, and he did make them. And that really changed the trajectory because when you see something, when you see like a beautiful saucer pass that goes through two layers from his backhand under pressure, hits the tape of his teammate, perfect leading pass, it's like, okay, there's more untapped skill here long term if he can bring this to the surface more often. So that's where we're at with him. There's always untapped Swedish defensive talent in every draft. You just got to find it, got to know it. Elias Salomonsson is an example of that, where obviously developing very well in the Jet system. We were very high on him relative to the consensus ranking publicly. We really believed in him. He's starting to really showcase what he can be. We don't think he's as offensively gifted as Salomonsson, especially from a mechanical perspective, but points trajectory, secondary offense like Salomonsson, more physical than Salomonsson, but not nearly as gifted the skater at the same age. That's kind of, if we were to do contrast with the Swedish G that we like, that we absolutely think is going to play top four here. But he has a chance, Jerome. He has a real chance. So, yeah, we like him. And he's one of those players that I don't think I've ever seen him mentioned. So there's one for everybody. And believe me, we have a lot more of that coming. Stay around. We found a lot of interesting untapped potential over there in Europe and never really seen the names, or they're not really discussed. So we'll get to watching them, or not watching. We're already watching, but talking about them shortly for you.
Yeah, and just to finish on Alquist, I think two things about him. I think me personally, I'll say projection. I'd say third pairing, but there's still some maybe untapped potential that maybe move him up to a top four, projection. But that's we'll see about that. Second thing that is really interesting about him is that his older brother is also draft eligible. A guy who went undrafted twice now. So it's his third year being draft eligible. He played for Sweden at the World Junior, and he might get drafted as well. So me and Brad were like talking about this, and this might be a trivia question because we can find an answer to that, or I couldn't find a set of brother. So my question, if anybody has an answer, write to us in the comment section. Has this ever happened that a set of brother get drafted in the same year, but they're not twins? We often, obviously, the Sedin are, let the legend out of Sweden, but like actual brothers that are not twin that are getting drafted in the same year, I couldn't find an answer. So it might be the first time. Who knows? But that was really interesting to me. That'd be a pretty cool story. So if anybody has an answer, let us know. Google was not really friendly to my research, so I couldn't really find any non-twin brothers that got drafted in the same year. So I mean, imagine the parents. your two son are getting drafted in the same year. That's pretty cool. So I mean, no guarantee his brother is getting drafted, but it might. It's a good chance.
Possible. It's definitely possible.
All right, so that'll conclude this week's episode. Hope you guys like it. So Brad and I will keep plugging away, scouting for the draft, starting to work on our everything we have to get ready for the there's 3 months left, so we got 3 months here to work on that final rankings and other stuff we're working on. So thanks everyone for watching. Brad, maybe a few last word for you before we end this episode.
Yeah, Roger McQueen. It's time to find out some truths. We're having a lot of difficulty with our top 10, and one of the reasons is we need McQueen back, and he's back tonight. So very excited to try to see what we're dealing with before the end of the season. I think 10 games left, Jerome. He has a 10-game sample here. That should be big enough for us to really figure out and identify what we're going to do, and we'll talk and break him down for sure here in the upcoming episodes.
Well, obviously 10 regular season game, and hopefully more in the playoff for him, because he's also he's a late birthday, so he's not eligible for the U18. So hopefully it's a long playoff run by him. But it's a bit like Caden Lidstrom last year, like coming back from a long injury. Like he didn't look like himself at the end of the season last year in the playoffs. So we'll see how LT and ready to go McQueen is, because he has not played since October. So that's a long time. So we can't judge him too hard to the first few games. So we have to see, like, is he really Roger McQueen, or he's like 75% Roger McQueen? So that's hopefully he gets a lot of games, basically is what I'm saying. So season and possibly a long playoff run, maybe. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching, and keep on liking our videos, subscribing to our channel. Does really good for us and help us grow the channel. So Brad and I will be back next week for another episode. So take care, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks everyone.